Okay, we'll give everybody a couple more minutes and get started. We're going to be on lesson 11 tonight. Here. All right. Let's give everybody a couple more minutes. Somebody joined by phone. Is that Joy?
Yes, Joy and Neil.
All right. Hey, Joy and Neil. How are you guys?
Good, David. How are you?
All right. Doing good.
There was once or twice we were able to join without using our phone, but haven't since the last couple of times.
Okay. So you're watching with the iPad and you're listening on the phone? That's how you...
You got it.
All right. Well.
And it works fine.
Make it work.
It works.
Pastor Rick.
Hello, David.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing good.
All right.
Yeah. Wonderful Monday.
Yes.
Well, the only one that's not here that I'm expecting to join is Shelley, and very unusual for her to be late, but we'll go ahead and get started without her. So, all right, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll get started with our lesson tonight on erosion. Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings and your word, and that we're able to look into your word tonight. And I think more than anything, take a warning for our own lives, and that we need to be careful how we live and never take for granted our faith or growing in you. Lord, we see many men and women in these chapters that were not following you, or followed you for a while and then didn't follow you later. So, Lord, help us to learn from that and the rest of your word tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Oh, got to log my wife in here to her computer so she can join us. Okay. You're welcome.
Amen.
All right, tonight we are in lesson 11 of part 1 of the Grow class. Part 1, as you know, is all about the Old Testament, the first part of the Old Testament, or the history of it. We are probably at least 3/4 of the way through, or even more. And we've been using this word stages as a way to try to remember the 6 main sections of the Old Testament history. So stages, S-T-A-G-E-S. Can anybody remember what the S stands for?
Starting.
Yes, very good. Starting. So it is the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. And anybody remember a couple things out of that section?
Here. Creation, flood, fall, and Baal. Battle.
Right. Creation, flood, fall, and the Tower of Babel.
Yes.
So it kind of, Tower of Babel scattered the nations, scattered the languages. We still see the results of it today, with various nations and various languages, and it's really difficult to make connections with people if you cannot speak and they understand you. So that was stages. Anybody remember what the T stands for?
Treaties and tribes.
Good. Treaties and tribes. And in that section in the book of Genesis, it was pretty much takes us the rest of the way in the book of Genesis. We didn't look at specific events, but to remember it, we're remembering specific people. And all right, anybody, those four guys from Treaties and Tribes.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph.
Very
The
good.
patriarchs.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So Jacob was the one who had the 12 boys that became the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's where the tribes comes from. The treaties in that kind of is another word for the word covenant. So lots of covenants going on in the book of Genesis. There was Noah had a covenant, Adam had a covenant even before this T for treaties and tribes, but you've got the covenant with Abraham, which is continually passed down to the next generations, to Isaac and to Jacob, and then to the 12 boys and the 12 tribes. All right, so after the T of stages, we've got an A.
Advancement.
Advancement. All right, advancement. Then with that one, we go into 4 different events.
Exit, wandering, conquering, and judges.
All right, exiting, wandering, conquering, and then the judges. So we get from the land of Egypt and then up into the promised land through advancement. And then last week we finished up the G of stages, which was
Glory.
glory. And we looked really, and I'm sure everybody remembers, we looked at 3 of the first 3 kings of Israel, Saul, King David, and Solomon. So that's where we ended up last night, or not last night, but last week with King Solomon. And we remember that Solomon started off really well, asked God for wisdom, was probably the most powerful king that Israel ever had, and the wealthiest, and extended the borders out from pretty much all the way out into past present day Iran, all the way over to touching even India, and then down into Egypt. So Solomon's extension of the nation was really wide and brought all sorts of wealth into the country. But it only took one generation, and really it only took one life making bad choices, and that was Solomon himself. Do we remember, anybody, what was Solomon's downfall?
Idleness.
Idleness, and he celebrated too risky.
Idolatry.
Well, he ended up in idolatry. He ended up in idolatry. And what was it that kind of moved him into idolatry?
All his wives.
Yeah. Right. All his
Yeah.
wives. He's the one with
The
700
woman
wives.
made me do it.
Say that again?
The woman made me do it.
Oh, well, yeah. And 700 wives and 300 concubines.
Wow.
So, and I don't know how much we talked about it. A lot of times taking wives back in those days was political. You would take a wife from a daughter of a king from another country. And so it was kind of like instead of signing a treaty, you just, traded daughters or something like that. And so that would just become another wife of the king. And it kind of was the hope that if a daughter of that other king lives in the capital of that other country, then that the dad won't attack the country where his daughter lives. So it was hopefully creating some sort of a barrier, or from warfare or getting attacked by that other country. So Solomon made wide use of that, but it didn't do him a whole lot of good on his relationship with God. You kind of lost track of that. And we see, and I'd like to read. Well, before I read and get into that, is anybody have any kind of thoughts from your reading this week? We read 1 Kings 12 through 19 and 2 Kings 9 through 12. All right. I'll just share mine real quick. Is how quickly, kind of quickly, these nations, Israel went from just being on top of the world to being totally destroyed, deported, sent into slavery, especially the northern kingdom. It only took right around 200 years for that nation to be taken over by the Assyrians and taken into slavery, really, going from Solomon and all of that wealth and then losing everything. And I think we'll realize as we look through the chapter this week why that was when we look at the list of the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel, why that happened so quickly. They had 19 kings, and we'll see that none of those 19 kings were very good. So it'd be really bad for the United States if you think about it, if we had 19 presidents in a row that were terrible. We would not be in a very good place, I think, if we went that we chose that badly. So that's kind of my thoughts, how quickly things went downhill. So let's I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen unless anybody has any other thoughts, and we'll get started with lesson 11, which is the E of stages, which is erosion. Oh, I don't think I shared it, did I? Everybody's still looking at each other. Okay. There we go. That might be better. All right, lesson 11, erosion. So we'll start on down this, and where we're headed tonight is the fact that Israel is going to divide. They're going to go, as we've talked about a few times, into a north and a south. 10 of the tribes are going to be in the northern kingdom, and 2 of the tribes are going to remain in this southern kingdom. And the most important part to remember is that this city of Jerusalem is in the south. It is in the southern part with the 2 tribes. And so that remains the capital. That's where the temple is. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. And so that is with the south. And then the north breaks off. Essentially, there's a border right here. And there's all sorts of warfare that goes on between the 2. So that's where we're headed. We're talking about erosion. Unity, I think really the big takeaway from this is that unity brings advancement, and unity brings wealth. Unity brings success. Division and disunity brings a mess. So that's what's going to happen here. We're going to erode because of the division. Now, the first king after Solomon's, his name was Rehoboam. And I'm not sure which of Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines Rehoboam came from, but somehow Rehoboam rose to the top. That was Solomon's choice to be the next king, to take over from him. And we're going to look at 1 Kings chapter 12, which is the story of when Rehoboam took over the throne. He succeeds Solomon as king, and he takes some poor advice. So after 40 years of heavy taxation, Israel was looking for relief. Solomon had not only acquired lots of wealth from the nations around them, but he had also taxed the people to the point of just exhaustion to be able to build the beautiful temple but mainly his palace. If you remember what we talked about last week, took 7 years to build the temple, took 13 years to build the palace. So he had to tax the people not only to build this palace, but after you build something, there's this thing called maintenance. So if you're a homeowner, you know this, that it costs money to maintain. You know, somebody may give you a house, but that means you got to still pay the taxes, the insurance, and when things go wrong, you've got to fix it. And remember back with Solomon, he had, what, 4,000 horses and stables for all those horses. So he built quite a place which required lots of taxes to be able to maintain his place, to feed all the people that he had to employ to take care of all of his stuff. So the people were ready for a break. They were looking for a George Bush that would say, no new taxes. But Rehoboam had a rival, a possible, another person that may run for king that may be popular, and his name was Jeroboam. So close to that name, Rehoboam, Jeroboam. And we see the story in chapter 11 of First Kings, where Rehoboam had been one of Solomon's officials, and he had rebelled against Solomon and had to take off and went to live in Egypt so that he wouldn't. It's kind of like a Moses went off to live in Egypt, went the opposite direction, and lived there so that Solomon wouldn't put him to death. But when he hears that Solomon has died, he comes back from Egypt thinking that maybe now he'll have his chance. So the scripture, 1 Kings 11:40 says, Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt to Shishak the king and stayed there until Solomon's death. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So here's the popular official. He had some people on his side, but he wasn't strong enough to overthrow Solomon. So he ran from Solomon and went to Egypt to hide. So now here's Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. He's the one that Solomon chose to be king. He has this rival named Jeroboam. Jeroboam was from the tribe of Ephraim. So he wasn't from one of those two southern tribes. He was from a northern tribe. So we've already got it set up here for a duel or a battle. We've got Rehoboam for the south, Jeroboam for the north, and they asked Rehoboam a question. They say, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt when he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away. So here's all the tribes coming to Rehoboam at the very start of him being the king, right after Solomon. Is he going to be the fourth big king of glory that follows in the wake of Saul, David, and Solomon? So he has a choice to make here. Are you going to take some of those taxes off of us, make life a little bit easier for us, or are you going to try to keep the lifestyle of your dad Solomon going and keep on taxing us? So Rehoboam asked the older men for some advice, and the older men, his elders, his advisors, say they should listen to the people and ease up on those taxes. That's what the older men say. But Rehoboam also asked the younger men, those advisors that he has that are his age. And the younger men say, no, sock it to them. So he says, make the taxes worse than your dad, because you're going to live a higher lifestyle, and Rehoboam, we're going to be your advisors, and you're going to need to support us and feed us, so let's keep taxing them. And so we wonder here, does Rehoboam listen to the older men or to the younger men? He makes his decision. It kind of seems self-intuitive that you would listen to those older people that have a little bit more experience and wisdom. But 1 Kings 12:13 says, the king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. I don't know if you've got that. I think that's in there. So Rehoboam listened to the young guys, and he told the people, I'm going to keep taxing you. Doesn't seem that smart, but I guess power went to his head. So 10 of the tribes go north and they take the name Israel, and 2 of the tribes go south and take the name Judah. It doesn't turn out exactly the way that Rehoboam wanted. 1 Kings 12:16 says, when all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, O David. So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. So we have a division now. They don't actually fight. If you read this week in there, Rehoboam, he musters all of his soldiers. He is going to immediately go after the north when they break away. And they make Jeroboam their king. And Rehoboam has 180,000 men ready to go fight from the south to try to invade the north and bring them back into the kingdom. But he is spoken to by a prophet that says, no, this is the Lord's doing. And in that 1 Kings chapter 11, where Jeroboam, right before or when he was coming back from Egypt, a prophet had met him and had taken his cloak and ripped it into 12 pieces. And he handed 10 of the 12 pieces over to Jeroboam. And he says, you're going to get 10 of the tribes, and Rehoboam will keep 2 of the tribes. And that's what ended up happening. So Rehoboam makes a wise choice here. He made a really bad decision before, but he actually decided at this point not to invade the north and not to go try to bring the north back. So it would have almost have been as if in 1861, when the southern states had left the Union, where Lincoln would have decided, I am not going to attempt to bring the South back into the United States. I'm just going to let them live their life down there, and the North is just going to be the North. So that's what Rehoboam decided to do, because mainly he at least had enough sense to realize that if God was in this, he wasn't going to be able to overturn it. So on the next page of your notes in page 64, we've got a list there of all of the kings of the northern kingdom. So Israel has 19 kings, and of all those kings, none of them are good. The northern king becomes known for idolatry, and the northern kingdom exists from 931 BC until 722 BC, which is about 209 years. So from the time of Rehoboam and the split, the northern kingdom survives for about 200 years and then is invaded, taken over, and all of the people are taken off into slavery. And nowadays we know these 10 tribes are called the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because as they're taken off into slavery, they're like sent all over the kingdom of Assyria to be slaves in different places. So families lose their connection with the rest of their family. Fathers and mothers are separated from their children. The stories then, in a lot of ways, don't get passed down. So after time goes on, these 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, other than Judah and Benjamin, which are the 2 tribes of the southern kingdom, they're pretty much lost. People don't remember what tribe they're from. And we see that eventually there's a lot of migration and dispersion. There's a lot of Jews that end up in Europe and Germany and Russia. We see that from even our history of World War II. There were a lot of Jewish people that lived in Eastern Europe and Poland and Russia and Germany, had been scattered, and none of them knew really what tribe they were originally from. And that is because of this northern kingdom, and it only lasted for 200 years, and it gets taken off into slavery. So if you read down your list of the kings of the northern kingdom, it's either bad, really bad, the worst, mostly bad, but none of them are even halfway good. And we'll talk about a few of these. So the story of the southern kingdom is that Judah has 20 kings. And all of the kings, a few of them are good. A few of them actually followed God and followed in the footsteps of King David. So the southern kingdom becomes known for its cycles. It has some bad kings, and then maybe a good king will come along, and he'll get rid of all the idols and all of the high places and not following after God. And then another bad king will come along, and they will head back down into idolatry. And I believe if I can, let's see if I can find, I tried to just hand draw the way the southern kingdom went. And of the 20 kings, this is how it went. It kind of maybe looks like either one of these things we see on the COVID positives or our economy, maybe. We're up and down. And this is kind of the way the southern kingdom went with their 20 different kings. All right, we'll go back into the PowerPoint. So the southern kingdom lasts from 933 BC to 586 BC, which is about 347 years. So the southern kingdom lasts for about 130 years longer than the northern kingdom. And in 586 BC is the time that the Babylonians came into Jerusalem and destroyed Jerusalem and took all the stuff from the temple back to Babylon. And it's really when we start the clock on when the Israel will actually come back, because Jeremiah prophesies that they'll be in servitude for 70 years. But they lasted for 347 years, about 130 years longer than the north, but they only had one more king than the north did. So you kind of notice as you look at the chart is that the kings tended to reign longer in the south than they did in the north. There were less changes, there were less assassinations and bad things happening. So the good kings tended to keep things going and reign for a pretty extended period. Some of the bad kings didn't reign for very long. And so the south lasted longer because they had a few good kings. All right, before we go on, there's some more information in the next couple pages of your book. We've got a little bit more about where everybody fits into the story and how a map of how Israel was divided on 67. If you want to go forward then to page 68, we'll continue on, but I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions or comments at this point. covered a lot of information. You will have noticed that if I mailed this to you, that it was a pretty thick envelope. This particular chapter has 11 or 12 pages, and we're dealing with the erosion part all in one night. So a lot to cover. Try to finish it up. There's again a picture of Israel, the 10 tribes of the north and the 2 tribes in the south. The south then becomes called Judah, and the north is Israel. All right, so we'll talk about first the northern kingdom. We're going to talk just about a few of the more important kings that they had and the significance of those kings. Jeroboam, as we did say, was the first king. It says in 1 Kings 12:25 that then Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. From there he went out and built up Peniel. I'll read 1 Kings 12:26. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, the king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves, and he said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Now, have we heard of a golden calf before? Anybody remember any golden calves?
Moses.
Don't either.
All right, I think I heard you, Mary, saying Moses and Aaron. Yeah,
Right.
in the when Moses went up on the mountain, and they thought he had died up there. Aaron made a golden calf and said, "Here's your gods that brought you up out of Egypt." He was trying to placate the people because they were pretty upset that Moses was gone and they were ready to go back to Egypt. So here is King Jeroboam, and if you think about it, this is probably about 600 years later after Egypt, after the people came out of Egypt. So a long time, long time. And the idea of the golden calf is still around. Let me see. Verse 29 says, one he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan, and this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship one there. So he sets up one of the golden calves in this town called Bethel. Bethel is right on the southern border with Judah, the southern kingdom. Dan is as far to the north as you can go in the northern kingdom. So he's pretty smart. He sets up one of the idols at the very border in the south, and the other idol, the golden calf, in the very border of the north. So he's trying to make it as convenient as possible for the people to worship. He sets one up there in the south and one in the north so they can go. And the main reason is, as I read it, is that he did not want his people from the north to be going down into the south to Jerusalem to actually worship. Because if you remember from the Old Testament, from the law, there were 3 festivals every year that a good Jewish person would go up to Jerusalem to celebrate. I think it was Passover, Tabernacles, and Trumpets. Those 3 festivals, the people would go to Jerusalem. So Jeroboam's like, if my people up here in the north go down to the south into the southern kingdom 3 times a year, they're going to be taking all the money down there. They're going to get used to worshiping down there, and I'm going to lose the kingdom. So he makes a decision after getting advice to say, I'm going to have to set up my own religion to keep my people within my borders. So he uses the golden calf idea. Here's the distribution. So you've got Bethel, which is right down here by Jerusalem, just north of Jerusalem. And then Dan is all the way up here at the top between Naphtali and Asher, those two tribes. So, and eventually Samaria here right in the middle is going to become the capital of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. And then you've got Judah, the southern kingdom, down here in the south. A lot of times you'll read, or you may hear prophecies sometimes, they'll say from Dan to Beersheba, which whenever you hear that in the Old Testament, it means kind of from all the way in the north of Israel, all the way to the south of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. And so that's what it means when they're talking about that, from the north to the south, kind of including all of Israel. So that's how it was, the land was distributed. Here's a picture of some ruins in this town of Dan in the very northern kingdom. Pastor Miller put these pictures in there because when he takes people to Israel, this is one of the places they always visit, is Dan, where the golden calf could have been set up here for their worship in the north. All right, so the prophecy of his destruction and his kingship is in 11:28 through 32, which we've already talked about. Jeroboam gets Israel started in idol worship because he's trying to keep his people within their borders. And even after this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways, but once more appointed priests for the high places from all sorts of people. So he creates his own religion. He creates his own gods. And he's like, I'm not going to just take Levites to be the priests. Anybody can become a priest. You go through my training program. You can be from any tribe you want. So he is completely going away from what God dictated on what worship was supposed to be. And pretty much he made a political decision. So he put his politics in front of his religion. And it didn't work out well for Jeroboam. Anybody who wanted to be a priest could be a priest. This was the sin of the house of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and its destruction from the face of the earth. So it's prophesied just a couple chapters in that Jeroboam and all of his family are going to be destroyed. And we see that happens. There is one of the future kings of the northern tribe. His name is Jehu. He is going to totally finish off the whole family of Jeroboam. All right, so the next strong king that we have is this king called Omri. And he's the one that brought the northern kingdom to international fame. He was a very organized king. And he's the one that built and made Samaria the capital city. And that Samaria is going to remain, and we see Samaria in the New Testament on a number of stories. Jesus has to pass through Samaria from Galilee to be able to get to Jerusalem to go up for the festivals. Anybody else remember a reference to Samaria in the life of Jesus?
Woman of Samaria.
The woman of Samaria, right? In John, he was in Samaria. And the woman at the well, right? She was from Samaria. Mm-hmm. Any other ones? A famous parable?
Yep.
The Good Samaritan comes out of this. And we kind of get from that how the true Jews down in the south, in Judah, even in Jesus's day, which is like 900 years after this, was still looking down on the people of Samaria. And it mainly comes from the fact is that there was the idol worship that was going on. Omri as a king was terribly sinful. Said, but Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned more than all those before him. And the one thing I guess to take from this is Omri was from the tribe of Issachar, and Jeroboam was from the tribe of Ephraim. So it's not just one tribe that takes over kind of the leadership in this northern kingdom. It's like whoever is the strongest is going to survive. We know that in the southern kingdom, all of the kings come from the tribe of Judah. And we know that, and we can see that in the genealogy of Jesus, because it's that kingship never leaves David's line of the tribe of Judah. But in the northern kingdom, it's all over the place. Our next king is the worst king, Ahab. And he not only had idolatry, but he introduces Baal worship to Israel. And God hates this sin because it involved, Baal worship involved the sacrifice of children. So they were encouraged to offer their children on this to Baal as kind of a sacrifice, to be able to get Baal to give them good things. They would offer up their children in sacrifice. So you'll hear a lot of times people refer to this as kind of a parallel to abortion in our own land. In our own land, we tend to sacrifice our children to the god of convenience. So Ahab's wife, anybody remember her name?
Jezebel.
Jezebel, that's right. Jezebel is Ahab's wife. She is the epitome of evil. She leads Ahab into more and more sin and more evil. She was not from Israel herself. She was one of those daughters that got traded from another king. She was from Sidon, which was a idolatrous people that lived right on the coastline of the Mediterranean there, just probably in modern day Lebanon is where Sidon was, where she was from. And so she had the influence of all of those other, traders coming in. So just a conglomeration of all sorts of religions and evil. 1 Kings 21:24 says, "Dogs will eat those belonging to Ahab who die in the city, and birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. There was never a man like Ahab who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, urged on by Jezebel, his wife." So don't have a whole lot of people nowadays, even now, that would name their daughter Jezebel. And it's because it continues on standing for this type of evil wife who led his Ahab. And, Ahab can't blame her. He was just as bad. So, and it's from Ahab and his wife Jezebel that we get the story in 1 Kings chapter 18 on Elijah versus the 400 prophets of Baal. And I'm sure all of you have heard that story. I won't take the time to read it all. It's in 1 Kings chapter 18. So I will assign that to you if you didn't get a chance to read it in your homework. Please read the entire story of Elijah and the 400 prophets of Baal. We all know that Elijah wins against the 400 prophets of Baal, but Jezebel was not real happy about it. All right, so condition of Israel at this time was just the fact that they had the worst leader they ever had, and they were in the greatest idolatry with the worst idol worship they could possibly have. And so that's kind of where we've ended up here with the northern kingdom. And it's interesting, God sent prophets, Elijah and Elisha, to this northern kingdom. And you think, God, why were you even wasting your time with that northern kingdom? But he gave it a try. So what was the significance of Elijah using water? The story is, if you remember, he took the altar and the sacrifice and he covered it all with water so that there was actually standing water, that when the fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice, it also consumed all the water. And he put hundreds of gallons of water all on that sacrifice, and God came through for Elijah when he called out for him. But the significance of water here is because at that time they were going through a famine, and they had not had rain for like 7 years at this point. So water was a very expensive and precious commodity, and Elijah, just to show what's going to happen here, pours out lots of very precious water on the sacrifice. But God comes through, and after that, the rain begins to fall. So great story. Please read that. You probably heard a number of sermons in your lifetime on Elijah and the 400 prophets of Baal. All right, so Ahab dies. First Kings chapter 22, verse 29 through 39. Ahab's death is the story of a king who, out of fear, disguised himself but was killed according to a prophecy anyway. So in battle, Ahab tried to disguise himself. He didn't want to look like the king, but he gets killed in battle. Jezebel eventually also, she dies a violent death. She's thrown from the top of the palace down on the ground. And there had been a prophecy from, I believe it was Elijah, that said that the dogs would lick up her blood, and that's exactly what happened to Jezebel. So not a great ending for Ahab and Jezebel. Next page is, we've got 2 more kings in the northern kingdom before we go to the south. Jehu is the king that essentially takes care of Ahab and takes care of the line of Jeroboam. His good side is he destroyed the family and the house and the dynasty of Ahab. And that's the one thing you see, is that the kingship in the north just keeps passing from one tribe, one family to another. There's actually what they call 9 different houses in those 19 kings that the northern kingdom had. There were 9 different families that were at one time a king in the northern kingdom. So you think about, in England, it's the house or the family of Windsor that are the kings, and it just keeps getting passed down generation to generation. In the land of Israel, the northern kingdom, it got passed around because there were assassinations and rebellions and army commanders siding with this other guy, and it just was violence constantly in the north. So Jehu, 2 Kings 9:5, when he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. "I have a message for you, commander," he said. "For which of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander." Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free." And that's what he did. If you read it, he takes care of Ahab and all of his family. And as he does this, he goes so far, the king of Judah at that time, the king of the south, was visiting Ahab, the king of the north. They were like in negotiations. So Jehu, just for fun, he kills both the king of the north and the king of the south at the same time. So he got a little carried away. So he ended that particular kingship in both the north and the south at the same time. All right, his bad side was 2 Kings 10:31. Says, "Yet Jehu was not careful to keep the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, which he had caused Israel to commit." So he did all of this. He got rid of the bad kings, the bad family, Ahab and Jezebel and the evil. But he, even after hearing from all these prophets and Elisha, the prophet is the one who anointed him king, he still did not turn away from the sin of Jeroboam, which is the idolatry. He still let those golden calves be in the north and the south, and they continued that form of worship. And probably for him, just another political decision to keep the people in the north and not go down to Jerusalem. I think David had a really good idea when he built the temple in Jerusalem and moved the Ark of the Covenant there. I think he in forethought understood, probably foresaw what was going to happen, and wanted to make sure that the worship of God would continue in his tribe in Judah. But anyhow, Jehu did not turn to the true God. He worshiped other idols. And then Hosea is the last king in that list of the 19 kings. He's the last king. Very weak, a very weak king. 2 Kings 17:3 says, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against him, and Hoshea became his servant and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, who had sent messengers to the king of Egypt and had offered up no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he'd done year by year. So the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. So at this point, the north has been pretty much influenced and taken over by this nation called Assyria. And so the north was paying tribute, was paying money every year to Assyria to try to keep their kingdom. But Hoshea, the last king, went off to Egypt to try to make a partnership with Egypt to be able to fight against Assyria. And the Assyrians found out about it, and they essentially came in and said, that's it, it's over with, we're taking over, we're going to remove everybody out of this land, and we're going to put in some of our own people. So Hoshea did not pay tribute to Assyria. God allowed the Israelites to go into slavery because of their wickedness. So at this point, the northern kingdom is gone. It is kind of absorbed into Assyria, and they all go into slavery. So pretty bad ending. Started with Jeroboam setting up those golden calves. 200 years later, the country is gone. When we think about that, though, you know, it seems to go really quick as you're reading it, but that 200 years, it doesn't take long, because, you know, if you think some of us or some of you may even remember a time in the United States where people were following God more than they do today. And it hasn't taken that long for people to get away from church and from God in our country. And so it didn't take that long in the Northern Kingdom either for them to walk away from God. I won't read all this. This was in the reading. It's 2 Kings 17:7. It's all about how the Northern Kingdom set up all of the false gods, and that's why God was upset with them, and they went into exile in Assyria, conquered by the Assyrians. And we talked about that, the 10 lost tribes, the Samaritans, and well, we'll go back. I'll let you write that down. Conquered by the Assyrians, a cruel, cruel people. It's where the 10 lost tribes come from, and the Samaritans. And what happens is the Assyrians move a lot of their people into this northern kingdom. There's still maybe some of the Jews that are left. Maybe all of them didn't have to leave. Some of them remained as slaves for the Assyrians that move in, and then they begin to intermarry. So this is the kind of people, this mixed race Assyrian Jew that end up living in this land of Samaria, which is the kind of people that Jesus is dealing with once he comes along in Samaria. Okay. All right, we'll go on to the south now. Any questions on the north? Okay, we'll try to do the south here in a few minutes. We've pretty much talked ad nauseum about Rehoboam. He was the son of Solomon. He was wicked and foolish. He did what the prophet said he would do. In 1 Kings 11, fulfilled the prophecy about himself. The sins committed under Rehoboam's reign, says Judah did evil in the eyes of the Lord by the sins they committed. They stirred up the jealous anger more than the fathers had done. They also set up for themselves high places, sacred stones and Asherah poles on every hill and under every spreading tree. So here you have, this is the south now. This is not the north. This is the south in Judah, where you have the temple, the Ark of the Covenant. You have the real worship of Yahweh going on, but they're also now setting up high places, Asherah poles. They're serving other gods alongside of serving Yahweh. So then Asa comes along, which is a good king. And I'm kind of going to look at the chart to see how long was it between the time of Rehoboam and Asa. Asa's the third king. So about 20 years, Asa comes along, who's a strong king. He was a man of prayer, a king of prayer. Asa called to the Lord his God and said, Lord, there is no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rely upon you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. O Lord, you are our God. Do not let man prevail against you. So he followed God and asked God for help when they had battles in the south of Judah. Asa's cleanup of the kingdom is in 2 Chronicles 15, but also he had a sin. Whoops. So he got rid of all those Asherah poles for a while, but his sin was this. The events of Asa's reign from beginning to end are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. In the 39th year of the reign of Asa, Asa was afflicted with disease in his feet. Though his disease was severe, even in his illness, he did not seek help from the Lord, but only from physicians. Then in the 41st year of his reign, Asa died and rested with his father. So here's your another man who followed God closely, sought God when they were in trouble to fight against other nations and as they were going out to war. Reigned for 41 years, but then here at the end of his life, it says when he had an affliction, he did not seek the Lord, but only got help from physicians. And so I think that's a good lesson for us. Physicians have their place, but don't be afraid, or make sure you bring God into the equation when you're sick. I felt like this when I went through my prostate cancer surgery. I had a good prognosis and a good surgeon, and everything should turn out fine. But I remember reading this at that time, and I'm like, I want to call, for the elders. I want them to anoint me with oil and pray, because I want the Lord's help and not just physicians for this. So seek after the Lord when you need physical help. Some of you may have similar stories to that, where you've seen God work. Next king we're going to talk about is Jehoram. And he brought about the beginning of Baal worship in Judah. So not only do we have Baal worship in the north, where you would expect it, because they weren't following Yahweh and didn't have the temple anyway. But we get to a point here now where Baal worship is in the south in Judah, right alongside the temple. And in fact, some of these kings are moving some of the Baal worship and some of the idols into the actual house of the Lord at this time. So his death is in 2 Chronicles 21:20. It says, Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He passed away to no one's regret and was buried in the city of David and not in the tombs of the kings. So just pointing out here, this particular king introducing Baal worship into Judah. One of the great grandson of King David, getting to this point, and he passed away to no one's regret. Nobody wants to have that on their tombstone, but he did. Nobody regretted the fact that he was gone. Now we have an interesting king in the line of kings in Judah. We have a female king. I don't know if we call her a queen, but I'm calling her a female king. This is Athaliah. She was the king or queen of Israel in the south, in Judah. And guess who she is? The daughter of Jezebel and Ahab. She's known as the Jezebel of the South. And it's an interesting story on how she ends up being the king in Judah. And it's kind of like I'd say an excursion away from the tribe of Judah just for a little while. What she tries to do is when she came in, she took over. Now this happened right after Jehu. If you remember right, Jehu killed the Ahab, but also since the king of Judah was there, he killed the king of Judah as well. And Athaliah was the mother of that king that got killed by Jehu. So she stepped in to take over for her son. And what she tried to do was kill all of the other possible kings in the tribe of Judah. She tried to wipe out the entire line of David. She did her homework, her ancestry homework, and tried to root out every last one of that David's line to make sure that nobody else could take over from her. But unbeknownst to her, she missed one. His name was Joash. And the priest, the high priest at that time, snuck Joash into the temple and hid him there. He was 8 years old at the time. So a direct descendant of David. So Athaliah did not know that they had kept Joash. And then there's a few, she was king for about 7 years. So they let Joash hide in the temple for 7 years. And then when he was about 15, 16 years old, they brought him out and they assassinated Athaliah and made Joash the king. And really he was the rightful king, and took back over. So that's what happened in her death. When Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and cheering for the king, and that's Joash, she went to them at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets, and singers with musical instruments were leading the praises. Then Athaliah tore her robes and shouted, "Treason, treason!" The people rejoiced to know that she was gone. So her reign ended right here, and Joash, the rightful king, became the king. Jehoiada the priest sent out the commanders of the units of 100 who were in charge of the troops and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, put to the sword anyone who follows her," for the priest had said, "Do not put her to death at the temple of the Lord." So they seized her And as she reached the entrance of the horse gate on the palace grounds, there they put her to death. All right, so this is Athaliah had been slain with the sword. I'm not going to read that. We're going to move on to Hezekiah. We got 3 more kings to look at, and we'll be done tonight. I know we're a little bit over, but let's finish up. Hezekiah was the best king that Israel had, or I'm sorry, Judah had. His first act was to cleanse the temple. So he came along after there was a couple bad kings. This is a little bit later. Hezekiah was the king at the same time that Isaiah was the prophet. So Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David, and Hezekiah his son succeeded him as king. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before or after him. So 2 Kings 16:20 and 2 Kings 18:5. Some references. Another powerful prayer life. King Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles 32:20, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, cried out in prayer to heaven about this. And in 2 Kings 19:14, Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord, spread it out before the Lord. Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, O Lord, and hear, and open up your eyes, O Lord, and see, and listen to the words Sennacherib has sent to insult the living God. So while Hezekiah was king, Judah was completely surrounded by the Babylonians. And Hezekiah prayed. Now this is the nation that would eventually take over Judah. But when Hezekiah prayed, God intervened, and they were able to defeat the Babylonians at that time. And that put off the ending of Judah for a while. I won't go into the tunnel. You can look or read about that later. There's an inscription of Hezekiah's tunnel. I did want to look at Hezekiah's illness and prayer in 2 Kings chapter 20. Because sometimes it's not great that you always get what you pray for. In those days, Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, went to him and said, "This is what the Lord says. Put your house in order because you're going to die. You will not recover." Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. "Remember, O Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully with wholehearted devotion and have done what is good in your eyes." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. In those days, Hezekiah became ill. I just read that part. Let's go on. Before Isaiah had left the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him. "Go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. From the 3rd day from now, you go up to the temple. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and the city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for my sake of my servant David." So Hezekiah here prayed as he was sick. He was pretty much told by the prophet Isaiah that it's over. Go check on your insurance because this is done. You're done. And he prayed, and God gave him 15 more years. Right. I'm going to move on. The answer was good and bad. How? He got 15 more years. And I won't read this. Go back and read 2 Kings 20. He got 15 more years. But the bad part was he had a son in those 15 years named Manasseh. Manasseh became the next king of Israel. He ruled for 55 years. He was the worst king, the most evil king that the tribe of Judah ever had. So you went from Hezekiah, the greatest king that Judah had, to his son Manasseh, who was the worst, the most idolatrous, and brought Baal worship back. So sometimes you just wonder, you think, you know, what do they say? The seed doesn't fall too far from the tree. But when you talk about Hezekiah and Manasseh, it's like night and day, or day and night, I guess I should say, with those two. And who knows, you know, he had the son in that last 15 years of his life. Maybe he didn't have enough time to train him because he died when Manasseh was really young. So we could talk about that, and why is it that you take your kid to church and you teach them everything that you can, and then they grow up and they don't follow it. You know, and that's the Hezekiah, Manasseh, what happened here.
Mhm.
So Josiah, another king after Manasseh, and it's really interesting here. He becomes king when he's the age of 8. And he rebuilds the temple, and the book of the law is found. And I think this is one of the most interesting stories in the Old Testament. It's Josiah. He decides that he's going to be a godly king. He's going to follow God. He makes this decision to be a godly king when he's 8 years old. And they start to clean up the temple because it's a mess after all those idols and everything else that's in there. And they uncover the book of the law. It's like the book of the law, it's been put up on a shelf and then covered up, and it's behind a bunch of idols, and nobody's seen it for years and years and years and years. And so as they're cleaning it up, they find the book of the law, and they start to read it. And they realize that they are not even close to what God has called them to do. So he starts a revival. 2 Kings 22:8 says, Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. So he gave it to Shaphan, who read it. When the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his robe. This is Josiah, the young king. He's hearing all this stuff that God has called him to do in the temple, all the sacrifices, all the festivals, everything that God has said, do this, and they haven't been doing any of it. So he tears his robes and brings about a revival in Judah because of Josiah's reign. Really the last high point of Judah before they go into or destroyed by Babylon. So 2 Chronicles 34:29 is your reference there. I won't read it so we can finish. Our last king is Zedekiah in 586. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Jerusalem 11 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke the word of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him take an oath in God's name. He became stiff-necked and hardened his heart and would not turn to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the leaders of the priests and all the people became more and more unfaithful, following all the detestable practices of the nations and defiling the temple of the Lord, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. So they're serving Babylon at this point. They're a vassal state. At this point, Judah is a vassal state of Babylon and is required to pay taxes. But Zedekiah refuses to pay, and Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar show up, and this is the end. It's 586, and they go into captivity. Last thing, why 70 years of captivity? I won't read this, but the reason that they had 70 years, they were in the land for about 490 years before they went into captivity. They were supposed to have every 7 years what was called a Sabbath year, where they let the land lay fallow, and they were supposed to not tend their crops or plant crops every 7th year. They had not done that. So there were 70 Sabbath years that Israel did not, and Judah did not adhere to while they were in the promised land. So God said, I'm going to give the land rest by sending you guys all off into captivity for 70 years. And so that's erosion. Now we've got the northern king the northern kingdom has been taken over by Israel or Assyria. We've got the southern kingdom that's been destroyed. The temple's been destroyed, and they're all hauled off into slavery into Babylon. So next week we're going to talk about servitude, and actually a king will come along that wants to send the Jews back to the promised land. So we will talk about that next week. Any final questions? I went over a little bit. I apologize. All right. Thank you, everybody. We've got 2 more
Thanks,
weeks.
David.
2 more weeks in The People, Part 1. We'll meet you next Monday night. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.